The photograph arrived at the Nanjing Historical Archive in the spring of 2019, part of a donation from the estate of Dr. Chen Mingzhu, who had passed away at the age of 104. I was working as a research assistant, cataloging materials related to pre-war Nanjing, and this particular image immediately caught my attention. It showed a classroom from what appeared to be the early 1930s. Approximately 30 students, all boys, sat at wooden desks facing forward. A teacher stood at the blackboard at the front of the room, his back partially to the camera. Chinese characters covered the blackboard. The room had traditional architectural elements, wooden beams, paper screens, a simple elegance that spoke of a time when China was struggling to modernize while maintaining its cultural identity. What struck me immediately was the students' posture. Every single child sat perfectly still, backs straight, hands presumably folded on their desks. Even accounting for the long exposure times required by 1930s photography, the uniformity was remarkable. Not a single head turned, not a single body slouched. It was as though the entire class had been carved from stone. On the back of the photograph, in faded ink, someone had written in Chinese, "Third-year students, Mingde Academy, Spring 1934. The last photograph." The last photograph. An odd way to caption a school picture. I began researching Mingde Academy. It had been a prestigious boys' school in Nanjing, operating from 1922 to 1937, when the Japanese invasion of the city ended its operation. The school had been known for its rigorous academic standards and strict discipline. Records showed it had educated sons of merchants, scholars, and minor government officials, families with enough money to afford private education, but not enough to send their children to the elite institutions. The archives contained several documents about Mingde Academy. Enrollment records, academic reports, scattered correspondence. The school had been run by Master Liu Wei, a scholar trained in classical Chinese education, who had reluctantly incorporated some Western teaching methods to satisfy modernizing parents. Everything I found suggested Mingde Academy had been a typical, if somewhat strict, private school. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would explain the ominous caption on the photograph. Then I found a letter dated May 1934, written by a mother to the Nanjing Department of Education. "Esteemed officials, I write to express grave concern about my son's education at Mingde Academy. My son, Chen Xiaohua, age 10, enrolled at the school in September 1933. At first, he seemed to thrive. He spoke enthusiastically about his classes, his classmates, his teacher, Master Liu. But beginning in March of this year, his behavior changed dramatically. He became withdrawn and frightened. He began having nightmares and would wake crying, though he would not say what troubled him. When I asked about school, he would only say that he didn't want to stay after class, and that the room changes when everyone leaves. 3 weeks ago, my son came home with bruises on his arms. When I demanded an explanation, he finally told me what he claimed was happening. He said that Master Liu sometimes keeps students after class for extra instruction. He said that when the other students leave, the classroom becomes different, darker, colder. He said the characters on the blackboard change to words he doesn't recognize. He said Master Liu's face looks wrong when they are alone. I initially dismissed this as childish imagination. But yesterday, my son begged me, not to send him back to school. He said 3 students have disappeared after staying late with Master Liu. He gave me names: Wang Jingming, Zhao Yuchen, and Huang Xiao. He says these boys came to class one day and were kept after and were never seen again. I contacted the families of these boys. To my horror, I learned my son was telling the truth. All 3 boys have been missing for weeks. The Wang family says they reported it to the police, who investigated but found nothing. The school claimed the boys simply stopped attending and assumed the families had withdrawn them. But the families never withdrew their sons. The boys simply disappeared. I have withdrawn my son from Mingde Academy and am keeping him at home, but I write to urge you to investigate this school. Something terrible is happening there. I fear for the children who remain. The letter was signed Chen Meiling. The son she mentioned, Chen Xiaohua, would have been Dr. Chen Mingzhu's older brother. I searched for any response to this letter. I found a brief notation in the Education Department files. Complaint investigated. No evidence of wrongdoing found. Case closed. But I found something else. A police report from June 1934 stated that 5 students from Mingde Academy had been reported missing over a 3-month period. The police had investigated, but found no evidence of foul play. The reports suggested the families had likely withdrawn the children and moved away without notifying the school. The cases were closed. 5 missing children. No investigation. Cases closed. I felt cold as I continued reading. Master Liu Wei had continued teaching at Mingde Academy until the school closed in 1937. After that, his name disappeared from historical records. I couldn't find a death record, a relocation record, or any trace of what happened to him after Nanjing fell to the Japanese. I examined the photograph more closely, using high-resolution scans to reveal details invisible to the naked eye. The students' faces became clearer under magnification. And that's when I noticed something that made my hands shake. Several of the students had expressions that weren't quite right. Their eyes were slightly too wide. Their mouths slightly too tense. They looked, I realized, like children who were terrified but trying desperately to hide it. And the teacher at the blackboard. Under magnification, I could see his profile more clearly. There was something wrong with the proportions of his face, the angle of his jaw, the way his head sat on his shoulders. It might have been a trick of the light or the limitations of the camera, but he looked somehow not quite human. I contacted Dr. Chen Mingzhu's son, Dr. Chen Wei, who lived in Beijing. I explained that I was researching his grandfather's school and had found the photograph and the letter his great-grandmother had written. Dr. Chen was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "My father never spoke about his brother. I knew he had an older brother who had died young, but I didn't know the circumstances." "Wait, you said you found a letter from 1934? "Yes. Your great-great-grandmother pulled her son from Mingde Academy because she believed children were disappearing. My God, I need to tell you something. A few weeks before my father died, his mind started to wander. He was over 100 years old, and he would sometimes confuse present and past. One afternoon, he suddenly grabbed my hand and said, 'They never found Xiaohua. The room took him. The room behind the classroom.' I thought he was confused, rambling. I never followed up on what he meant. Your grandfather disappeared." That's what my father seemed to be saying. But the family records say Chen Xiaohua died of illness in 1934. That's all I knew. I researched Chen Xiaohua further. His death was registered in July 1934, cause listed as fever, but there was no burial record, no mention of which hospital he'd died in, no death certificate beyond the brief registration. A cover-up. The family had reported him dead to avoid the stigma and questions that would have come from admitting he'd disappeared. I found 4 other boys with similar deaths, registered in summer 1934, all of them students at Mingde Academy, all listed as dying from fever or unspecified illness, none with proper death certificates or burial records. 5 boys who disappeared and were officially declared dead to close the cases. I went to the location where Mingde Academy had stood. The building had been destroyed during the Japanese occupation and never rebuilt. A modern apartment complex now occupied the site. But in the city archives, I found the original architectural plans for the school. The plans showed something interesting. Behind the main classroom, accessible through a small door that would have been hidden by the teacher's desk, was an additional room. Not marked on the plans, just a small notation in the margin. Storage. Restricted access. A room behind the classroom. The room Chen Mingzhu had mentioned in his dying words. I searched for any other references to this room. I found an interview transcript in the archives from 1946, when historians were documenting war damage in Nanjing. An elderly janitor who had worked at Mingde Academy before the war had been interviewed. Question: can you describe the layout of the school? Answer: standard layout. Classroom, Master Liu's office, entry hall, nothing special. Question: were there any other rooms? Answer: long pause. There was. Master Liu said there was a study room behind the classroom for private instruction, but we were told never to clean it. Master Liu said he would maintain it himself. Question: did you ever see inside this room? Answer: once. I accidentally opened the door. It was dark. So dark I couldn't see anything even though it was midday and the classroom had windows. And it was cold. Much colder than the rest of the building. And there was a smell. Like earth. Like something underground. Master Liu found me looking and became very angry. He told me if I ever opened that door again, I would join the students who had stayed too late. I never went near it again. Question: what did you think that meant? Answer: I didn't want to think about it. But children were disappearing. Everyone knew. The families knew. The police knew. But Master Liu had connections. His uncle was a minor official. No one wanted to investigate too deeply. And then the war came and it didn't matter anymore. A dark room, cold, that smelled like earth, where students were taken for private instruction and never seen again. I researched Master Liu Wei more thoroughly. He'd been born in 1888 in a rural village in Jiangsu province. He'd studied classical Chinese literature and philosophy, had passed the imperial examinations before they were abolished. He'd come to Nanjing in 1920 and established himself as a private tutor before opening Mingde Academy in 1922. But I found something else. In the village where Liu Wei was born, there were old stories, superstitions. I found a collection of folk tales recorded by an anthropologist in the 1910s, including several from Liu Wei's home village. One story was about a type of supernatural entity called a room spirit, or classroom ghost. According to the legend, sometimes a teacher who died with great bitterness or rage could become trapped in the place where they taught. Their spirit would inhabit the room, and the room itself would become a kind of trap. Students who stayed alone with the spirit would be taken into a shadow place, a dark realm that existed alongside the classroom, but separate from normal reality. The story was meant as a cautionary tale, a way to explain students who disappeared or died suddenly. I would have dismissed it as superstition, except for one detail. The description of the shadow place matched what Chen Xiaohua had described to his mother. Darker, colder, with strange writing on the blackboard. I found one more document. A letter dated December 1937, written by a Japanese officer to his superior. During the occupation of Nanjing, our forces secured the area that included the former Mingde Academy. The building was largely abandoned. When our soldiers entered to establish a temporary command post, they discovered something unusual in one of the rooms. Behind the main classroom, accessible through a small door, was a second room. The room was entirely empty. No furniture, no decoration, nothing. But the walls were covered in scratches, as though made by fingernails, and there were bloodstains on the floor that appeared to be recent, despite the building having been abandoned for months. Most disturbing were the photographs found in the room. 5 photographs of young boys, each image showing a child sitting alone at a desk, looking terrified. The photographs were old, dated 1934, but they had been carefully preserved and arranged on the floor in a circle. Our soldiers refused to remain in the building. They reported feeling watched, hearing whispers, experiencing sudden drops in temperature. We relocated the command post to a different building. I don't know what happened in that room before our arrival, but something terrible occurred there. The building should be marked for destruction. 5 photographs of 5 terrified boys, arranged in a circle in an empty room that smelled like earth and was covered in scratch marks. Chen Xiaohua, Wang Jingming, Zhao Yuchen, Huang Xiao, and one other boy whose name had been lost to history. 5 students who stayed after class with Master Liu. 5 students who were taken into the room behind the classroom, the shadow place that existed alongside reality. 5 students who never came home. The photograph from spring 1934, the one that had started my research, was labeled the last photograph. I understood now. It was the last class photograph taken at Mingde Academy, before parents began withdrawing their children, before the school's reputation collapsed, before everyone acknowledged what had been happening. I looked at the image again. 30 students sitting in perfect stillness, backs straight, hands on desks, their teacher at the blackboard. And behind that blackboard, behind the teacher's desk, was a small door. In the photograph, the door was slightly open. Just a crack. Just enough to show darkness beyond. I enhanced that section of the image. In the darkness beyond the door, there appeared to be something. A shape. Vague and indistinct. It might have been a trick of the light, a shadow, an artifact of the old photograph. Or it might have been a small hand pressed against the inside of the door, as though someone inside that dark room was trying to push it open, trying to escape. I wrote up my findings and submitted them to the Archive's Historical Research Committee. The report documented everything I'd found: the disappearances, the suspicious deaths, the room behind the classroom, the testimony from the janitor and the Japanese officer. The committee was skeptical. Without physical evidence or witness testimony from someone still living, they said, we couldn't make definitive conclusions about what had happened at Mingde Academy. The disappearances were tragic, certainly, but could have been due to many factors: kidnapping, accidents, children running away. We couldn't prove that Master Liu Wei had been responsible, and we certainly couldn't prove anything about a shadow place or supernatural abduction. That was folk superstition, not history. But they did add a notation to the Mingde Academy records. Multiple students reported missing during 1934. Circumstances unclear. Further research needed. I visited Chen Wei one more time before I finished my work on the project. I wanted to tell him what I'd learned about his grandfather, Chen Xiaohua. We met at a tea house in Beijing, and I explained everything I'd discovered. Chen Wei listened quietly, his expression growing more troubled as I spoke. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. "My father carried guilt his entire life," he finally said. "He would have nightmares, even as an old man. He would wake up crying, saying he should have helped his brother. I never understood what he meant. Now I do." "It wasn't his fault," I said. "He was a child. And his mother took him out of school as soon as she understood something was wrong. But Xiaohua went back." Chen Wei pulled out an old journal, worn and fragile. "After my father died, I went through his belongings. I found this, his diary from 1934. There's an entry from July that I didn't understand until now." He opened the journal to a marked page and translated from the Chinese. July 14th, 1934. Xiaohua went back to the school. Mother and I begged him not to, but he said he had to. He said his 3 friends were still there, in the dark room, and he could hear them calling to him at night. He said he was the only one who knew where they were, the only one who might be able to help them. He went back on July 12th. Mother and I waited all day for him to return. He never did. Father went to the school the next day. Master Liu said Xiaohua had never arrived. The building was empty. The school was closing. Too many parents had withdrawn their children. Father went into the classroom anyway. He said the door to the back room was open. He called Xiaohua's name. No answer. He tried to enter the room, but he said it was like trying to walk through ice. There was resistance, cold, a sense of wrongness that made him physically ill. He came home alone. We reported Xiaohua missing, but the police did nothing. A week later, Father paid someone to file a death certificate. It was easier than explaining that our son had disappeared, trying to rescue his friends from a room that shouldn't exist. Mother died the next year. They said it was pneumonia, but I think it was grief. Father never spoke of Xiaohua again, and I promised myself I would never speak of it either, but I failed him. I should have been braver. I should have gone back with him. I should have helped him try to save his friends. I failed my brother. Chen Wei closed the journal. My father was 9 years old when this happened. He carried the guilt of not going back with his brother for 95 years. And I never knew. I never understood his nightmares, his fear of dark rooms, the way he would sometimes stare at classroom doors as though expecting them to open. "What do you want to do with this information?" I asked. "I want the record corrected. I want the truth documented. Chen Xiaohua didn't die of fever in 1934. He disappeared trying to save his friends from whatever was happening in that school. He deserves to be remembered for that." The Nanjing Historical Archive eventually added an amended record for Chen Xiaohua and the 4 other boys who disappeared. The records now state that they were reported missing in 1934 under suspicious circumstances related to Mingde Academy, and that false death certificates were filed to close the cases. It's not everything, but it's something. The photograph from spring 1934 is now displayed in a small exhibition about pre-war education in Nanjing. The caption reads, Mingde Academy, Spring 1934. This photograph shows students at what was then considered one of Nanjing's finest private schools. Shortly after this image was taken, multiple students were reported missing under circumstances that were never fully investigated. The school closed in 1937. Visitors often stop to look at the photograph, at the perfectly still students, their backs straight, their posture rigid, at the teacher at the blackboard, at the slightly open door behind him, darkness visible beyond. Sometimes people ask me what I think really happened at Mingde Academy, whether I believe in the stories about the shadow place, the room that existed alongside reality, but separate from it, whether I think Master Liu Wei was something other than human, or something that had stopped being human. I don't have answers. I only have facts, documentation, testimonies. 5 boys disappeared. Families reported strange occurrences. A janitor spoke of a dark, cold room that smelled like earth. A dying man mentioned his brother being taken by a room. And there's the photograph. 30 students sitting in perfect order, trained by discipline or by fear to never move, never turn, never look behind them at the door that led to the room where some of their classmates had vanished. Mingde Academy was renowned for order, for the perfect stillness of its students, their exemplary discipline, their unwavering attention to their teacher. Parents praised Master Liu Wei for maintaining such control over young boys who were normally so difficult to manage. But the students weren't sitting still because of discipline. They were sitting still because they were terrified. Because they knew that some students were kept after class, taken into the room behind the blackboard, and never seen again. Because they knew that if they misbehaved, if they drew attention, they might be next. The school was renowned for order, until students began vanishing after class, until 5 boys disappeared into a room that shouldn't exist, until parents finally realized that the perfect stillness of their sons wasn't discipline, it was fear. The photograph from 1934 captured that fear. 30 terrified children sitting perfectly still, trying desperately to be good, to be invisible, to avoid being the next one kept after class. And behind them, the door slightly open, darkness visible beyond, perhaps a small hand pressed against the inside, trying to escape. The last photograph, taken at Mingde Academy. The last time all those students were together before some of them disappeared into the shadow place that existed behind the classroom. The last moment before parents understood that the school's famous order was built on terror and maintained by the mysterious disappearance of children who broke the rules or were simply unlucky. Mingde Academy closed in 1937. Master Liu Wei vanished from history. The building was destroyed. The room behind the classroom, if it ever physically existed, is gone, but the photograph remains. 30 students sitting in perfect order, a teacher at the blackboard, and a door slightly open, showing darkness beyond. Darkness that might have contained 5 boys who never came home, who disappeared into a place that existed alongside our reality, but separate from it. A shadow place. A room that changed when everyone else left. A darkness that smelled like earth and was cold even in summer. A place where children were taken for extra instruction and never returned. The photograph shows a school renowned for order, until you learn what maintained that order, until you understand what the slightly open door meant, until you realize the students aren't sitting still because they're well-disciplined. They're sitting still because they're terrified of being kept after class.